What up, YouTube? Hope you guys are having a good day. But I had an interesting thought. And, part of it was experience, and then just also something I was reading in the Bible. And it's that basically the presence of pain doesn't necessarily mean the absence of God's grace in a particular situation. I had a situation where I was younger, and I was going home to surprise my dad, my dad and family, and I needed an oil change, so I went by one of those quick oil change places. I got an oil change real quick, got a special additive to the oil that's supposed to help the endurance of the engine. And I drove home, surprised family, everything was cool. Came back, and on the way back, it was late at night. It was like a 20 plus hour drive. So I got back into town around, we'll say like 9 o'clock, 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and I was coming around a curve, and my car shut off on me. It just shut down on me, just like that. I don't know what was going on with it or anything. Well, come to find out, I had like a little small piece. After I, of course, made it back to my place where I was staying and everything, I had to go get it, which is terrible and sucked. I think I had to have it towed, so. Excuse me, that was even worse. And then actually I had to fix the problem. But the problem turned out to be a relatively inexpensive repair, so to speak. Even though I was pretty young, so even an inexpensive repairs, can be taxing on you. And but the repair was still, relatively cheap. But the situation that developed when I found out, in addition to that, is that my car was out of oil. And if my car had been rolling or driving a little bit longer, I would have not only lost that little bit of piece potentially, but I would have probably lost the engine in my car. And so, even though I went through a little bit of pain to change out that little piece, I believe God's grace saved me from actually having to buy a whole new engine for that car. And there's a story, well, I'll tell you afterwards. But to go back to my point, is that a lot of times in life, I believe we think that going through pain is a symbol or a sign that God doesn't love us or doesn't care about us. But in actuality, sometimes it could be either preparation for a harder situation, or it could be, like in the case with the car, a little bit of pain instead of having a lot of pain. And I believe, in most situations, people would choose to have a little bit of pain. Well, most people would choose to have no pain at all, but in reality, sometimes that's just not possible, because we have our own, the way we're brought up, we have our own thoughts, we have our own wants. And sometimes we just don't have the wisdom to make the best choices in particular situations. And so the biblical story I think about is about Joseph in the Bible. Now Joseph, he had favor with his father, and he basically kind of made enemies of the rest of his family, his brothers and stuff like that, because of that favor. And so Joseph had a dream about, his family bowing down to him. And not only that, and because, Joseph had a coat of many colors, he basically had the favor of his father. He had hatred toward from his other brothers and stuff, and jealousy. So if you know the story, One day Joseph went down to go search for his brothers. His brothers, saw it as a good opportunity to get rid of him, basically. Some of his brothers wanted to actually take him out. And the other brother, trying to save him, said, hey, let's just sell him into slavery. So Joseph gets sold into slavery. And he goes through a really hard time. He gets betrayed. He gets forgotten about in some cases. But ultimately, he ends up being the second in command over Egypt. And that was through the Pharaoh having a dream and him being able to seek God and God interpreting that dream. Excuse me. So Joseph becomes the premier, or whatever you want to call it, over Egypt, second in command under Pharaoh. And during this particular time, there was a famine in the land, so there was a lot of hunger going on. Nobody really had food, but because of the wisdom of Joseph, that he got from God, Egypt actually had grain and was able to sell to everybody. So in that process of him, selling to different nations and peoples, his family, his brothers, the ones that actually sold him to slavery or, tried to take him out, came up there and basically they were looking for grain because in their area they also were having food shortages as well. So, long story short, Joseph forgave his brothers, but in the end, even though his brothers betrayed him, almost tried to take him out, Joseph ended up in a position to be able to bless his brothers and Israel, the whole nation of Israel. So the trials and tribulations he went through, being falsely accused, of rape, basically. He was almost off by his brothers. He went to prison because he was falsely accused, and in prison he talked to a couple people that was under the judgment of the king, and he helped them out, or he actually told them their prophecy about dreams they had. And then the one guy who survived forgot to tell the king about his ability until this particular situation came up about the famine. But if you look at it from I guess you could say a macro point of view, stepping back, God allowed Joseph to go through a painful situation in order to give God's grace to a greater situation of pain, which would have been hunger, potentially the non-existence of a nation, coming up. But he had to go through that pain, and we a lot of times may have to go through that as well. I can't say that's always going to be the case where we have to go through pain, but we shouldn't necessarily negate the pain as something that is God punishing us or being mean to us, and sometimes even when you are disciplining your kids or whatever, you're trying that discipline there is to keep that kid from being disciplined a lot more and a lot worse later on, and so it's just I guess it's just more to be encouraging and hopeful in your situation, that just because you're going through something bad right now doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be bad forever. And it also could be a preparation or a detour to help you be prepared for something worse that comes on later. So, but I just wanted to pass that on, that particular thought, and I hope it helped somebody, and hopefully my yawning didn't throw you off. But if they did, hey, that's for you, But I believe the people who needed to hear the word or hear that message are going to hear it and stay. So I appreciate your time. Hopefully it helps, and you guys take care.